Imagine a sound capable of instantly freezing the blood in the veins of dozens of people going about their daily business in an ordinary California supermarket. It isn't the sound of a shattering storefront or the wail of a siren. It is a shrill, hysterical female scream, escalating into ultrasound, piercing the air like a drill, forcing shoppers to drop their grocery baskets and plug their ears. The calendar reads 1968, and we are in a long checkout line where the atmosphere, previously saturated with boredom and the scent of fresh pastries, suddenly thickens into a storm cloud of violence. At the epicenter of the scandal stands a woman whose face is distorted by a grimace of inexplicable hatred toward a young cashier who dared to ring up the wrong receipt. Looming beside her is her husband, a huge, sweaty brute in a dirty tank top, his biceps covered in prison tattoos, his gaze promising trouble to anyone who meets his eyes. The situation escalates with every passing second. An elderly man standing behind the couple politely asks them to calm down, but in response, he receives not an apology, but a violent, crude shove to the chest. The old man flies backward, hits his back against a shelf of canned goods, and slides to the floor, clutching his heart. The crowd gasps, but no one moves. People are paralyzed by fear. They see before them not just a bully, but a predator who has caught the scent of blood and is ready to tear apart anyone who stands in his way. The Hulk looks around with a triumphant smirk, savoring his dominance. He is certain that he is the law, the judge, and the executioner all in one. But in this line, there is one man for whom the laws of physics and justice work differently. This is Bruce Lee. He stands a little further back, holding a carton of milk, observing the scene with a cold, analytical calm that is more frightening than any aggression. You probably think he's about to drop his groceries and take a fighting stance. That would be too predictable. Bruce takes a step forward, but not toward the brute. Instead, he goes to the fallen old man. He helps him up, brushes off his jacket, and in this simple gesture, there is so much human dignity that the brute perceives it as a personal insult. And here is where our narrative dagger comes into play, an object that seems completely out of place in a fight, but which will become the key to the resolution. Look at Bruce's right hand. He isn't clenching a fist. He is holding the handle of an ordinary metal grocery cart, piled high with purchases. The cart is heavy, cumbersome, with a sticking wheel, the worst weapon one could imagine. But Bruce holds it as if it were a samurai sword. He doesn't let go. He doesn't push it aside. He uses it as an extension of his body. The brute, seeing this, decides the Chinese guy is hiding behind the cart out of fear. "Hey you," he roars, turning his entire body toward Bruce. "You want some too, hero? Or are you going to hide behind your macaroni? Ask yourself honestly, what would you do? Drop the cart and run? Or try to strike first?" Bruce Lee did neither. He simply tightened his grip on the handle. In his eyes, there wasn't a drop of fear, only cold calculation. He understood that this cart was not a shield. It was a lever. It was a ram. It was the tool with which he intended to rewrite the laws of gravity for this 260-pound bully. The brute took a step forward, winding up a punch meant to smear Bruce across the floor, but he didn't know that at that moment he had stepped into a trap with no way out, and that in 4 seconds he would wish he had never entered this store. To understand the mechanics of the catastrophe about to unfold in the narrow aisle between the shelves of grains and canned goods, you need to step inside the head of this aggressive giant for a second. He is used to the world, bending under his weight. He doesn't see Bruce Lee, the martial arts master. He sees just a little man who made a fatal mistake by meddling in business that wasn't his. The brute is certain that his fist is an argument for which there is no counter. He already tastes victory. He sees Bruce's head snapping back, his glasses flying off his nose. He relishes the crowd's fear, absorbing it like a drug. "Who's next?" he bellows, spraying saliva, his voice cracking into a screech. "Who else doesn't like how my wife talks?" In that moment, time in the supermarket stretches. turning into slow motion. Bruce Lee stands absolutely still. He doesn't take a fighting stance. He doesn't clench his fists. He looks relaxed, almost bored, as if he's waiting for a bus rather than a fight. And this unnatural, frightening stasis is confusing. Why isn't he afraid? Why isn't he running? The brute perceives this calm as a challenge, an insult to his authority. He decides it's time to end the conversation. He swings. It's not the technical punch of a boxer. It's a wide, haymaker swing into which he puts all his mass, all his malice toward the world. He doesn't just want to hit, he wants to destroy. But look at Bruce's hands. He is still holding the handle of the metal cart. Our dagger is ready for action. The spectator expects Bruce to let go to free his hands for a block. But here, a plot twist effect kicks in, turning everything upside down. Bruce does not let go of the cart. On the contrary, he grips it tighter. He takes a half step forward toward the blow, closing the distance to a critical point. Is this suicide? No. It's physics. Bruce Lee turns the cart into an extension of his skeleton. He uses it not as a shield to hide behind, but as a ram to attack. In the split second when the brute's fist begins its flight toward Bruce's face, Lee executes a movement that cannot be seen by the eye, only felt. He sharply thrusts the cart forward, but not into the opponent's torso. Lower, directly into his knees. Simultaneously, he uses the cart's inertia to shift himself to the side, moving out of the line of fire. It is brilliant and simple. While the giant's upper body flies forward, carried by the momentum of his swing, his legs meet a rigid obstacle. The cart, loaded with cans and packages, slams into the attacker's shins with the force of a sledgehammer. Do you hear that sound? It's not the sound of flesh hitting flesh. It's the screech of metal and the crunch of joints. The brute, who expected to meet a soft face, suddenly finds the ground disappearing from beneath his feet. His own inertia, which was supposed to kill Bruce, is now killing him. He loses his balance. His body, deprived of support, continues its forward arc, turning into an unguided projectile. He is no longer the hunter. He is the victim of gravity and his own rage. And Bruce? Bruce stands to the side, still holding the cart handle with one hand, watching the giant's flight with the same calm with which he chose his milk. He hasn't struck him once. He simply allowed physics to do all the dirty work. But the brute's flight isn't over yet, and his landing spot will become the final chord in this symphony of humiliation. At the very second the grocery-laden cart met the giant's knees, a visual silence descended upon the supermarket, as if even the fluorescent lights had stopped humming. Sound vanished. All that remained was the screech of metal and the surprised, stifled gasp of a man who suddenly realized he no longer controlled his own body. The brute, this king of the line, this tyrant of the checkout, had suddenly turned into a clumsy child who tripped over nothing. His legs, swept out by the cart's rigid frame, flew upward, while his torso, pulled by the inertia of that monstrous swing, continued its forward flight. It was a sight worthy of slow motion. 260 pounds of live weight, rotating in the air, flying toward its destiny, and nothing in the world could stop that flight. Do you expect him to fall on the floor? To break his nose on the tile? That would be painful, but it would be ordinary. Fate, or Bruce Lee, had prepared something more sophisticated for him. Directly in his flight path loomed a massive, colorful pyramid of cornflake boxes, a promotional display the store employees had spent all morning building. The brute crashed into it with the grace of a falling meteorite. Crash! The sound was epic. Cardboard tore, boxes flew in every direction like shrapnel. Bright packaging rained down, burying the defeated aggressor beneath them. The roar was such that it seemed as if the roof had collapsed. But the most interesting thing was happening not in the pile of trash, but beside it. Look at Bruce Lee. He stands exactly where he was. His breathing is steady. His jacket is not wrinkled. And in his hand is our dagger, that very metal cart. It didn't tip over. Not a single can fell out of it. Bruce held it, using it as a lever, and now he stood leaning on the handle as a gentleman leans on a cane. He didn't land a single blow. He didn't touch his opponent with a fist. He simply used the enemy's energy and a nearby object to turn a threat into a farce. The crowd in the store froze. People couldn't believe their eyes. They had seen a terrifying, dangerous man destroyed in a second, and it was done by a guy who hadn't even taken a fighting stance. The brute lay in a mountain of cereal, stunned, humiliated, covered in dust and crumbs. He tried to stand, but his legs slid on the slippery floor. His wife, who had just been screaming at the cashier, went silent mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open in a silent cry. She looked at her hero, floundering in cardboard, and didn't recognize him. And here comes the moment of truth. Bruce Lee didn't finish him off. He didn't laugh. He slowly walked over to the pile of boxes. He looked down at the lying man. There was no malice in his eyes. There was only the calm, cold confidence of a teacher who had just given a lesson to a wayward student. Bruce reached out his hand, not for a strike, to help. "Get up," he said quietly. But in that silence, his voice sounded like a command. The brute, still not understanding what was happening, mechanically grabbed the extended palm. Bruce pulled him to his feet with a jerk. He brushed a stuck cereal box off the giant's shoulder and uttered a phrase that became legend. "Manners are free, but a dentist is expensive. Learn politeness before life teaches you more painfully." The giant stood with his head bowed. His aggression had evaporated. He was crushed, not physically, but morally. He realized he hadn't lost a fight. He had lost at life. Bruce Lee turned around, took his cart, and calmly returned to the line, letting that same old man who had been pushed earlier go ahead of him. "After you, sir," he said with a smile. And in that moment, the line erupted in applause. It wasn't an ovation for a movie star. It was an ovation for a man who restored justice without spilling a drop of blood, using only his mind, his reaction, and a cart full of groceries. When the last of the applause died down, replaced by respectful whispering, Bruce Lee was already at the register, placing his groceries on the belt with the same methodical neatness with which he had just dealt with the bully. But the real drama, hidden from most eyes, was unfolding at that moment, not at the register, but at the store exit, where Big Mike was trying to gather the remnants of his dignity. You probably think that after brushing off the cereal, he simply ran away, cursing everything under the sun. That would be logical for a coward. But Mike wasn't a coward. He was just a fool who had received the harshest lesson of his life. He stood by the doors, looking at Bruce, and in his eyes, cleansed of rage by the impact with reality, something new could be read. Fear mixed with a painful curiosity. He still felt the phantom pain in his knees where the cart had struck, but his ego hurt more. He walked over to his wife, who was still standing in a daze, took her by the hand, and without saying a word, led her outside. But here occurs that intellectual orgasm of realization that makes you rethink the entire situation. Remember our dagger, the grocery cart. It remained standing in line, whole and unharmed. Bruce used it as a weapon, as a shield, as a lever, but he did not damage it. He didn't spill the groceries. This was proof of ultimate mastery, using the environment without destroying it. If Bruce had punched Mike, he might have broken his hand or killed the man. But the cart? The cart simply did its job and returned to its peaceful function. This was a metaphor for the entire philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, efficiency without unnecessary effort. Witnesses of that evening later said that the old man Bruce protected approached him in the parking lot. He wanted to thank him, to offer money, but Bruce only shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank gravity. It is always on the side of those who know how to keep their balance." And in those words was hidden a deep irony. Mike lost, not because he was weak, but because he lost his balance, both physical and moral. He allowed anger to control him, and anger led him into a pile of trash. Bruce, however, remained in the center of his own storm, calm and unshakable. This story quickly spread through Los Angeles, growing with legendary details. Some said Bruce broke the cart in half. Others claimed he threw the brute onto the top of a shelf. But the truth was much more mundane and therefore more powerful. He simply didn't let himself be hit. He turned aggression into a farce. And now, looking at this episode through the prism of time, we realize it wasn't just a conflict in a checkout line. It was a masterclass in managing reality. Bruce Lee showed that a true warrior doesn't seek a fight, but if a fight finds him, he ends it so quickly and effectively that the opponent doesn't even have time to understand what happened. But one question remains that haunts everyone who has heard this story. What became of Mike? Did he learn his lesson? They say that a week later, he returned to the same store. He stood in line, quiet and still, and when someone accidentally bumped him with a cart, he didn't scream. He simply smiled and stepped aside. Perhaps the impact with the cereal boxes knocked some sense into him better than any lecture. Bruce Lee changed a man without even touching his face with a fist. He changed him by showing how pathetic strength looks without intelligence. And that, perhaps, was his greatest victory that evening. When Bruce Lee walked out of the supermarket, holding a brown paper bag of groceries, the evening air of Los Angeles seemed especially fresh to him, as if nature itself had exhaled with relief after the tension broke. But for us, the audience, this story doesn't end in the parking lot. It leaves behind a trail of questions that concern everyone who has ever faced rudeness. We live in a world where aggression is often considered the norm, where a loud voice and arrogance open doors. Bruce Lee showed an alternative. He didn't sink to the level of the bully. He didn't play by his rules. He created his own rules, in which a grocery cart becomes a weapon of retribution, and politeness becomes the final blow. Ask yourself, what would you have done? In an era of surveillance cameras and lawsuits, would you risk using force? Or would you remain silent, saving your nerves, but losing your self-respect? Bruce Lee lived in a different time, but his lesson is eternal. He teaches us that evil cannot be ignored, but responding to it with the same evil means losing. One must be water, flow around obstacles, but sweep them away if they block the path of justice. That evening in the supermarket became a legend not because Bruce beat someone up. It was because he protected the weak using his mind, not just his fists. And now, I want to pass this question to you. Look at this situation from the outside. Who was Bruce Lee at that moment? Was he a hero who restored order and punished evil using the minimum necessary means? Or was he a provocateur who, possessing deadly skills, could have avoided the conflict, but chose to humiliate a man for his own ego? Whose side are you on? The side of just force, or the side of pacifism? Write one word in the comments: justice or pacifism. I will be waiting for your answers, because it is in them that the understanding lies of whether we are ready to defend our boundaries, or whether we are ready to let bullies rule the world just to keep the silence. And did you notice that Bruce didn't even wrinkle his jacket? Write whether you think this is ultimate skill or just luck. 29.5